Turn along with me, if you would, in Matthew 6, verses 1 through 18. It's like 7:20 if you're using the Bibles that are in the seats in front of you. In the movie Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio plays a con artist by the name of Frank Abagnale Jr., who in the year of 1964 to 1967, along with writing bad checks for millions of dollars, also faked his way into being a trans-American Airlines pilot, traveling millions of miles. Also a pediatrician in a Georgia hospital. And then also an assistant district attorney for the state of Louisiana. And it wasn't until he was caught, and this all happened, I should say, before he was the age of 19. This is a true story. He was eventually caught by FBI agent Carl Henready, played by Tom Hanks. Well, there was one scene in that movie that was kind of a defining moment, and interesting because it exposed kind of the realness behind this character, where all you saw was all the facade of all the things that he did and all the, the traveling and the excitement of all that kind of stuff. And the scene was one, and it was a Christmas evening. Tom Hanks' character didn't have his family either, and so he was alone. And this Abagnale called him, and he wanted to apologize because recently he had kind of scammed him and got out of a situation of being arrested, faking he was someone else, a Secret Service, and he got away. And so he called to apologize for that. And there was a statement at the end of that scene where Henready, Tom Hanks' character, said this. He said, "You didn't call me to apologize. You called me because you have no one else to call." Outwardly, lies give us this appearance of control. We have the ability to be able to empower because we have the ability to be able to kind of dictate what people know and they see about us, what you can have related to information, what you can. We can kind of manipulate people to be able to acknowledge and give us praise and all of these kind of things in our life. And so we create these masks and we think that, okay, everything's looking good and we're enjoying all this outward stuff that's going on. But are we really enjoying it? Tom Hanks said later on in the movie, there was another scene where he had said, sometimes it seems like lying is better than reality. But really is it? The truth is that it often leaves us lonely and stressful and suffocating in our own lives and our own life. We see applause or we see approval from people, and people are impressed by us and the way that we are and the things around us. But we think of things like, what if they knew the real me? What would they think? Would I get the approval and applause of people if they really knew what I was like? And so we kind of fear this rejection of people, and so we create bigger lies to be able to control people even more. And we're juggling all of these relationships to try to be able to keep them under control. And we find ourselves having to keep them distant as well, because they can't get too close. If they get too close, they're going to know the truth. And so we continue to run ahead of the truth, out of the fear that when we're exposed, it would all crumble away and people would leave. And this is definitely true when it comes to relationships. Because in relationships, you have to keep them at arm's length. That's why in so many relationships, in families, the reality is you can fake it. You can fake it in your work, or you can fake it in your church, or you can fake it in those kind of relationships. But when you get home at night, they know the real you. And what they see outside when we're driving around, or outside when we're other places, and what they see at home are different. And we find the fact that we cannot keep them compartmentized. We cannot control and be one way at work and yet be another way at church. And so even church is affected in the way that we give an appearance of how we are. I saw in the movie, or throughout that movie when you're looking at it, this Abagnale was longing to be real in a relationship. He would run into people and he wanted to tell the truth, but he couldn't, because he knew what would happen if he did. Well, Jesus offers us a chance if we're in that kind of a situation. He offers us the opportunity to be able to just be ourselves and be set free of the appearance that we might have, and set free to be able to be real in our faith, in our life, in our relationships. And so we've been looking at the Sermon on the Mount. We've been looking on this idea, the title of it is ReThink. And we've been looking at life and society and the way people live and saying, let's rethink that. Let's rethink, is that really the way we should live? Is that the really way we should behave? And what does it mean to be happy, we talked about? What does it mean to be an influence of other people? What does it mean to live life in a right way? What does it mean to really seek justice in life? And so today he looked at the area of spirituality. What does it mean to be real in our spirituality? To be real in religion, real in our faith. And so let's take a look at what Jesus says here, and then we're going to dig in a little deeper in it. Chapter 6, starting at verse 1, this is what it says. Jesus says, "Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they receive their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they receive their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. When your Father who sees all that is done in secret will reward, then your Father who sees all that is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins." There's a lot of stuff in there, and every one of them, there could be several weeks in digging in deeper into this. But we're really wanting to see kind of an overall picture of what Jesus is trying to describe as he's using these examples. You know, spirituality and religion at the time Jesus was there was something that had gotten to a level of really being about performance. Really being about the imagery that you would get and the way that you would behave around people. From the time that Moses had received the 10 Commandments from God, the religious leaders and the religious society had expanded that to 613 commandments. You know, maybe like government and the Constitution, all that. Beyond those commandments, there was another 1,000 amendments to those commandments, and trying to be able to define outwardly, what does it mean to be righteous? What does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be walking in our life right with God? And so people would feel this a burden, really, of trying to make sure that we're doing every bit right. And other people would make sure that if I'm going to do something, I need to do it in a way that people see that I'm in line with what's right and doing things the right way. I mean, to give you an example, there were rules. I mean, there's a lot of crazy ones, but one was, for example, the Sabbath. You know, the law was that you're supposed to keep the Sabbath holy, you're not supposed to work, and you're not supposed to travel, and you're not supposed to do a lot of those kind of things. So they would say, what does travel mean? Well, leaving your house was considered travel, so you're not supposed to leave your house. But what you could do is if you tied a rope to your house and a rope to your ankle, and you happen to walk outside your house, technically, you're still attached to the house. So you'd be okay. Another one was that when you wash, you had to make sure that you were clean, and so you had to wash your hands and never be unclean in your hands and stuff. Well, how do you know? Is it under the sink, or is it, what's washing? Well, they said, well, you had to wash to a level that the water would go down to your elbow and drip. And when the water drips, then you're done. They didn't have timers, I guess, back then. So it's better to follow the water. But those are just two crazy examples that I have. But the other one that was a big one, common, was your acts of righteousness. What was it to be able to live and act righteous before God? And so in doing that, there was three main ones. There was alms, or giving to the poor, the charity that you would show to people around you. There was prayer, obviously, talking to God and the prayers that you had. And then there was fasting. In the Old Testament, we did this when we talked about the feast. There was only one time that you needed to fast in the initially set up. But now they expanded that to fasting once or twice a week that you would be able to include. And fasting became a part of a definition of what it meant to be righteous. And so we see here that Jesus comes at this. And Jesus comes at it and says, we're going to hit this head on. This whole idea of being righteous, this whole idea of spirituality. And so we see from this, if we look back to verse 1, Jesus comes out with a very primary truth of what he based the rest of what he has to say on. It's right in that first verse when we look at the message that he's trying to say. He says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness, referring to these three things, or the common ones, before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. That's it. He could have ended there. But then he goes on to be able to kind of explain that and to be able to go on beyond that and give those three illustrations. Now, it's worth noting the fact that he wasn't condemning the acts. In fact, if you look in every three example, he says, when you give to the needy, he says, when you pray, or when you fast. So in other words, he's not saying if you, or should you not. These are given things that Jesus is saying, no, it's okay. That's what we would expect you to do. The act of giving, the act of prayer, the act of fasting, in and of themselves, there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's expected in the relationship that you have with your Father in heaven, with God himself. There's never a question that the behaviors that we often define in relationship to our faith about whether or not those things are appropriate or right. As a Christian, we are called together to come together and worship God in community. We're called to do that. As a Christian, we're called to read the Bible and do devotions. We're called to pray. We're called to give. We're called to live in community. We're called to serve. We're called to study and grow. We're called to evangelize. That's part of who we are as a Christian. Every one of those behaviors are not only normal and right, but they're really expected as a part of who we are as a Christian. So he's not even going there in questioning any of those things. The assumption is that they're... What he really is focusing is on the behavior itself. And so there's a couple words that Jesus that really kind of identify what he's trying to say in here. In verse 1, he talks about, of course, the practice of righteousness, what I meant. But in there he says, the word he says, to be seen. And so the word be, we see two words, be seen. But actually that comes from one Greek word, which is theomi, which we get theater from. So in other words, when he said be seen or theomi to these people, what he's talking about is performance, is stage and acting. They connect that right away. So he's talking about Broadway. That's what he's talking about when he says that. And so he says when you do it to make theater, to perform, is what he's addressing there. And then he goes on to describe, and later on we see the word hypocrite, which actually is the first time it's used. It was only used once, that word, and it was in Hebrew in the Psalms. Now it comes into the New Testament, and Jesus uses it. And in this particular one, the Greek word for that is hypocritus, which is why we get hypocrite. But it actually means acting or one who pretends to be another. So here Jesus says, theater, performance, when we're talking about these things, when you do these things, he says, don't be a performance, don't be an actor, don't try to emulate some character you see in Hollywood. That's what he's focusing on, the behavior behind it that he's trying to be able to see in this. And so, in other words, Jesus is calling it out by saying, look it, God is tired of you faking it. God is tired of you going around and trying to look good to the people around you and not focus on how you look as it relates to God. To be able to focus on your external behaviors and not focus on your internal behaviors, because he's saying God focuses on the inside, not on the outside. And so Jesus goes in to bring that out. The one last thing, and if you're in life groups, you're going to talk about this a little later, is he's not trying to contradict what he just said in chapter 5. If you've been with us several weeks, in chapter 5 he talks about being salt and light. And he says in here, he says verse 16 in chapter 5, in the same way let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. And then in chapter 6 he says, no, don't do it so people could see it. If someone's sitting there thinking, okay, here I see this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. No. Jesus is not talking about the behavior. He's talking about the motives. And so when we talk about spirituality, we need to take a look at the motives that are behind it. What does it really mean to be spiritual? What does it mean to really live this faith that Jesus is trying, this life that Jesus is trying to describe? and the motives behind it.